My viewers will not have noticed this if I've done this correctly, but I'm actually recording this rule before the previous rule, just because Rule 7 is such a huge chunk of text that I'm really dedicating a lot of time to it. And I wanted to expedite the recording of these rules so that I can get them out nice and easy. As you guys know, if you're subscribed to the channel, then you'll know that I've also been working on Over Heaven and George Joestar concurrently. So that's been a lot of work. It's been quite taxing on my voice. And Rule 7 is something that I want to be relaxed and well prepared for. So I don't want to just dive into it. So I'm going to work on these shorter chapters, Rule 8, Rule 9, Rule 10, before I jump into Rule 7. I've been trying really hard to make sure that jumping from one rule to the next is actually quite a smooth endeavor, especially if you're listening on the playlist. A lot of thoughts have actually sort of mixed and matched between the different rules, but here we have quite a significant jump, so I do apologize about that. All the same, I hope you guys are enjoying the recording. This is of course, coming back from the intermission, this is my first recording, so I think it's been pretty interesting to see the responses to this series. I hope to lose another 20 subscribers, perhaps more, hopefully more, as the rest of these videos come out. I think it's actually a lot better for people to be aware of the content they watch and to unsubscribe to things that they not disagree with really, but they don't find agreeable. And I think that's a useful distinction to have, because there can be things that you disagree with, but you enjoy listening to and engaging with all the same. And there are other things that even if you agree with them, or even if you think that they are important, the format of them or the presentation is just not worthwhile. I'm not saying that my own content is, well, actually that is pretty much what I'm saying. I think my content, especially this Hail Hydra business, I don't think is worthwhile at all. And if you think that it's not worth subscribing to, I would gladly recommend that you don't subscribe. I personally am not subscribed to very many YouTubers. I'm only subscribed to 5 at the moment, and even one of them I don't actually really engage with. I'm not really a big watcher of. It's a channel called C.S. Lewis Essays, and I just have it there. If I'm bored, I just listen to one of C.S. Lewis's essays. It's sort of an audiobook format, and it keeps me entertained, but it's really difficult, and it really grabs your attention. So I only listen to that maybe once a week if I'm being very earnest. So that's been my subscriptions, and I think that's just a nice little tip that I can give to my viewers. Please, by all means, feel free to unsubscribe. I think it's a nice way to show that the content is disagreeable. But honestly, this is supposed to be a JoJo channel. I appreciate that a lot of you guys are subscribed for that content, so I appreciate if you guys think this is just the sort of odd indulgence, to use a word that I've become a fan of. Praise be our supreme leader, Red Skull. Rule 8. Tell the truth, or at least, don't lie. Hail Hydra. Part 1. Truth in No Man's Land. I trained to become a clinical psychologist at McGill University in Montreal. Hail Hydra. While doing so, I sometimes met my classmates on the grounds of Montreal's Douglas Hospital, where we had our first direct experiences with the mentally ill. Hail Hydra. The Douglas occupies acres of land and dozens of buildings. Hail Hydra. Many are connected by the underground tunnels to protect workers and patients from the interminable Montreal winters. Hail Hydra. The hospital once sheltered hundreds of long-term in-house patients, Hail Hydra. This was before antipsychotic drugs and the large-scale deinstitutionalization movements of the late 60s all but closed down the residential asylums, most often dooming the now freed patients to a much harder life on the streets. Hail Hydra. By the early 80s, when I first visited the grounds, all but the most seriously afflicted residents had been discharged. Hail Hydra. Those who remained were strange, much damaged people. Hail Hydra. They clustered around the vending machines scattered throughout the hospital's tunnels. Hail Hydra. They looked as if they had been photographed by Diane Arbus or painted by Hieronymus Bosch. Hail Hydra. I feel like I've already missed a couple of Hail Hydras just because I've fallen out of practice these past couple of weeks. But I'll save my 3 Hail Hydra practice for later, because I'm sure I'll miss a few more still. One day, my classmates and I were all standing in line. Hail Hydra. We were awaiting further instruction from the straight-laced German psychologist who ran the Douglas clinical training program. Hail Hydra. A long-term inpatient, fragile and vulnerable, approached one of the other students, a sheltered, conservative young woman. Hail Hydra. The patient spoke to her in a friendly, childlike manner and asked, "Why are you all standing here?" Hail Hydra. "What are you doing?" Hail Hydra. Can I come along with you?" Hail Hydra. My classmate turned to me and asked uncertainly, "What should I say to her?" Hail Hydra. She was taken aback, just as I was, by this request coming from someone so isolated and hurt. Hail Hydra. Neither of us wanted to say anything that might be construed as a rejection or reprimand. Hail Hydra. We had temporarily entered a kind of no man's land in which society offers no ground rules or guidance. Hail Hydra. We were new clinical students, unprepared to be confronted on the grounds of a mental hospital by a schizophrenic patient asking a naive, friendly question about the possibility of social belonging. Hail Hydra. The natural conversational give and take between people attentive to contextual cues was not happening either. Hail Hydra. What exactly were the rules in such a situation, far outside the boundaries of normal social interaction? Hail Hydra. What exactly were the options? Hail Hydra. There were only two, as far as I could quickly surmise. Hail Hydra. I could tell the patient a story designed to save everyone's face, or I could answer truthfully. Hail Hydra. We can only take 8 people in our group. Would have fallen into the first category, as would have, we are just leaving the hospital now. Hail Hydra. Neither of these answers would have bruised any feelings, at least on the surface, and the presence of the status differences that divided us from her would have gone unremarked. Hail Hydra. But neither answer would have been exactly true. Hail Hydra. So I didn't offer either. Hail Hydra. I told the patient as simply and directly as I could that we were new students, training to be psychologists, and that she couldn't join us for that reason. Hail Hydra. The answer highlighted the distinction between her situation and ours, making the gap between us greater and more evident. Hail Hydra. The answer was harsher than a well-crafted white lie. Hail Hydra. But I already had an inkling that untruth, however well meant, can produce unintended consequences. Hail Hydra. She looked crestfallen and hurt, but only for a moment. Hail Hydra. Then she understood, and it was all right. Hail Hydra. That was just how it was. Hail Hydra. I had had a strange set of experiences a few years before embarking on my clinical training. Hail Hydra. I found myself subject to some rather violent compulsions, none acted upon, and developed the conviction, in consequence, that I really knew rather little about who I was and what I was up to. Hail Hydra. So, I began paying much closer attention to what I was doing and saying. Hail Hydra. The experience was disconcerting, to say the least. Hail Hydra. I soon divided myself into 2 parts, one that spoke, and one more detached that paid attention and judged. Hail Hydra. I soon came to realize that almost everything I said was untrue. Hail Hydra. I had motives for saying these things. I wanted to win arguments and gain status and impress people and get what I wanted. Hail Hydra. I was using language to bend and twist the world into delivering what I thought was necessary. Hail Hydra. But I was a fake. Hail Hydra. Realizing this, I started to practice only saying things that the internal voice would not object to. Hail Hydra. I started to practice telling the truth, or at least not lying. Hail Hydra. I soon learned that such a skill came in very handy when I didn't know what to do. Hail Hydra. What should you do when you don't know what to do? Hail Hydra. Well, tell the truth. Hail Hydra. So that's what I did my first day at the Douglas Hospital. Hail Hydra. Tell the truth, Hail Hydra is just the perfect encapsulation of this entire enterprise. Later, I had a client who was paranoid and dangerous. Hail Hydra. Working with paranoid people is challenging. Hail Hydra. They believe they have been targeted by mysterious conspiratorial forces. Conspiratorial. I think I pronounced that correctly. Conspiratorial forces. Working malevolently behind the scenes. Hail Hydra. Paranoid people are hyper alert and hyper focused. They are attending to non-verbal cues with an intentness never manifest during ordinary human interactions. Hail Hydra. They make mistakes in interpretation, that's the paranoia, but they are still almost uncanny in their ability to detect mixed motives, judgment, and falsehood. Hail Hydra. You have to listen very carefully and tell the truth if you are going to get a paranoid person to open up to you. Hail Hydra. I listened carefully and spoke truthfully to this client. Hail Hydra. Now and then he would describe blood-curdling fantasies of flaying people for revenge. Hail Hydra. I would watch how I was reacting. Hail Hydra. I paid attention to what thoughts and images emerged in the theater of my imagination while he spoke, and I told him what I observed. Hail Hydra. I was not trying to control or direct his thoughts or actions, or mine. Hail Hydra. I was only trying to let him know as transparently as I could how what he was doing was directly affecting at least one person, me. Hail Hydra. My careful attention and frank responses did not mean at all that I remained unperturbed, let alone approved. Hail Hydra. I told him, when he scared me, which was often, I told him that his words and behavior were misguided and that he was going to get into serious trouble. Hail Hydra. He talked to me, nonetheless, because I listened and responded honestly, even though I was not encouraging in my responses. Hail Hydra. He trusted me, despite, or more accurately, because of my objections. Hail Hydra. He was paranoid, not stupid. Hail Hydra. He knew his behavior was socially unacceptable. Hail Hydra. He knew that any decent person was likely to react with horror to his insane fantasies. Hail Hydra. He trusted me and would talk to me because that's how I reacted. Hail Hydra. There was no chance of understanding him without that trust. Hail Hydra. Trouble for him generally started in a bureaucracy, such as a bank. Hail Hydra. He would enter an institution and attempt some simple task. Hail Hydra. He was looking to open an account, or pay a bill, or fix some mistake. Hail Hydra. Now and then he encountered the kind of non-helpful person that everyone encounters now and then in such a place. Hail Hydra. That person would reject the ID he offered or require some information that was unnecessary and difficult to obtain. Hail Hydra. Sometimes, I suppose, the bureaucratic runaround was unavoidable, but sometimes it was unnecessarily complicated by petty misuses of bureaucratic power. Hail Hydra. My client was very attuned to such things. Hail Hydra. He was obsessed with honor. Hail Hydra. It was more important to him than safety, freedom, or belonging. Hail Hydra. Following that logic, because paranoid people are impeccably logical, he could never allow himself to be demeaned, insulted, or put down, even a little bit, by anyone. Hail Hydra. Water did not roll off his back. Hail Hydra. Because of his rigid and inflexible attitude, my client's actions had already been subjected to several restraining orders. Hail Hydra. Restraining orders work best, however, with the sort of person who would never require a restraining order. Hail Hydra. I'll be your worst nightmare was his phrase of choice in such situations. Hail Hydra. I have wished intensely that I could say something like that after encountering unnecessary bureaucratic obstacles, but it's generally best to let such things go. Hail Hydra. My client meant what he said, however, and sometimes he really did become someone's nightmare. Hail Hydra. He was the bad guy from No Country for Old Men. Hail Hydra. Wow, that's terrifying. He was the person you meet in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hail Hydra. If you messed with him, even accidentally, he was going to stalk you, remind you what you had done, and scare the living daylights out of you. Hail Hydra, he was no one to lie to. Hail Hydra, I told him the truth, and that cooled him off. Hail Hydra. Part 2. My landlord. I had a landlord around that time who had been president of a local biker gang. Hail Hydra. Do biker gangs have presidents? I thought they just had like leaders, or I don't know. I don't know about the bureaucracy. Speaking of bureaucracies, the bureaucracy of a biker gang. Good God. Hail Hydra. My wife, Tammy, and I lived next door to him in his parents' small apartment building. Hail Hydra. His girlfriend bore the marks of self-inflicted injuries, characteristic of borderline personality disorder. Hail Hydra. She killed herself while we lived there. Hail Hydra. Denis, large, strong French-Canadian with a grey beard, was a gifted amateur electrician. Hail Hydra. He had some artistic talent too, and was supporting himself making laminated wood posters with custom neon lights. Hail Hydra. He was trying to stay sober after being released from jail. Hail Hydra. Still, every month or so, he would disappear on a days-long bender. Hail Hydra. He was one of those men who have a miraculous capacity for alcohol. He could drink 50 or 60 beers. It's in singular for some reason. 50 or 60 beer. That's not correct. He could drink 50 or 60 beers in a 2-day binge and remain standing the whole time. Hail Hydra. This may seem hard to believe, but it's true. Hail Hydra. I was doing research on familial alcoholism at the time, and it was not rare for my subjects to report their father's habitual consumption of 40 ounces of vodka a day. Hail Hydra. These patriarchs would buy 1 bottle every afternoon, Monday through Friday, and then 2 on a Saturday to tide them over through the Sunday liquor store closure. Hail Hydra. Denis had a little dog. Hail Hydra. The start of the worst children's song ever. Denis had a little dog and he was an alcoholic. Sometimes Tammy and I... Hail Hydra. Sometimes Tammy and I would hear Denis and the dog out in the backyard at 4 a.m. during one of Denis' marathon drinking sessions, but both of them howling madly at the moon. Hail Hydra. Now and then, on occasions like that, Denis would drink up every cent he had saved. Then he would show up at our Hail Hydra. Then he would show up at our apartment. Hail Hydra. We would hear a knock at night. Hail Hydra. Denis would be at the door, swaying precipitously upright and miraculously conscious. Hail Hydra. He would be standing there, toaster, microwave, or poster in hand. Hail Hydra. He wanted to sell these to me so he could keep on drinking. Hail Hydra. I bought a few things like this, pretending that I was being charitable. Hail Hydra. Eventually, Tammy, my wife, convinced me that I couldn't do it anymore. Hail Hydra. It made her nervous, and it was bad for Denis, whom she liked. Hail Hydra. Reasonable and even necessary as her request was, it still placed me in a tricky position. Hail Hydra, what do you say to a severely intoxicated, violence-prone, ex-biker gang president with patchy English when he tries to sell his microwave to you at your open door at 2 a.m? Hail Hydra. This was a question even more difficult than those presented by the institutionalized patient or the paranoid flayer. Hail Hydra. But the answer was the same. The truth. Hail Hydra. But you'd bloody well better know what the truth is. Hail Hydra. Denis knocked again soon after my wife and I had talked. Hail Hydra. He looked at me in the direct, skeptical, narrow-eyed manner characteristic of the tough, heavy-drinking man who is no stranger to trouble. Hail Hydra. That look means prove your innocence. Hail Hydra. Weaving slightly back and forth, he asked politely if I might be interested in purchasing his toaster. Hail Hydra. I rid myself to the bottom of my soul of primate dominance motivations and moral superiority. Hail Hydra. I told him as directly and carefully as I could that I would not. Hail Hydra, I was playing no tricks. Hail Hydra, in that moment I wasn't an educated, anglophone, fortunate, upwardly mobile young man, Hail Hydra, and he wasn't an ex-con Quebecois biker with a blood alcohol level of 0.24. Hail Hydra, no, we were two men of goodwill, trying to help each other out in our common struggle to do the right thing. Hail Hydra, I said that he had told me he was trying to quit drinking. Hail Hydra, I said that it would not be good for him if I provided him with more money. Hail Hydra, I said that he made Tammy, whom he respected, nervous when he came over so drunk and so late and tried to sell me things. Hail Hydra. He glared seriously at me without speaking for about 15 seconds. Hail Hydra. That was plenty long enough. Hail Hydra, he was watching, I knew, for any micro-expression revealing sarcasm, deceit, contempt, or self-congratulation. Hail Hydra, but I had thought it through, carefully, and I had only said things I truly meant. Hail Hydra, I had chosen my words carefully, traversing a treacherous swamp, feeling out a partially submerged stone path. Hail Hydra, Denis turned and left. Hail Hydra. Not only that, he remembered our conversation despite his state of professional level intoxication. That's very funny. Hail Hydra. He didn't try to sell me anything again. Hail Hydra. Our relationship, which was quite good, given the great cultural gaps between us, became even more solid. Hail Hydra, taking the easy way out, or telling the truth. Those are not merely two different choices. Hail Hydra, they are different pathways through life. Hail Hydra, they are utterly different ways of existing. Hail Hydra. Part 3. Manipulate the world. You can use words to manipulate the world into delivering what you want. Hail Hydra. This is what it means to act politically. Hail Hydra. This is spin. Hail Hydra. It's the specialty of unscrupulous marketers, salesmen, advertisers, pickup artists, slogan-possessed utopians, and psychopaths. Hail Hydra. It's the speech that people engage in when they attempt to influence and manipulate others. Hail Hydra. It's what university students do when they write an essay to please the professor instead of articulating and clarifying their own ideas. Hail Hydra. It's what everyone does when they want something and decide to falsify themselves to please and flatter. Hail Hydra. It's scheming and sloganeering and propaganda. Hail Hydra. You know that example of a student writing an essay to please a professor makes me think of advice that I'd like to share as often as possible, so I'm just going to share it here even though it's not quite topical. One of the best things I ever learned from university, and especially about writing essays, is if you don't know what to say about any given topic that you're writing an essay about, then just say it. Say that you don't know. Say that you don't know the answer. And that's going to be a much more valuable articulation of your point of view than to ramble on and on about something that you don't quite understand. Because when you're writing an essay, like Jordan Peterson says here, you are clarifying your point of view. You're trying to make sure that your voice is heard, and you're not just trying to do it for, the grades or anything like that. And I really believe this is the secret to writing a good essay. Write as much as you understand about the topic and don't give up halfway through. Really learn as much as you can about the topic. Don't just, accept your lack of knowledge, right? Challenge yourself to be as eloquent on this topic as possible. But if you reach the limits of your knowledge and there is no way for you to further pursue that knowledge, then admit it and say as much and say, I don't know the answer to this particular conundrum or question or how to continue this flow of logic. This is as far as I can get. Admit as much, and in that admission, you will find your voice. It's kind of like, when you confess at a church, you say what you've done wrong. You're kind of doing the same thing in an essay. You're just being true to yourself. That's the most important thing. And I guess it did end up being topical because what does that mean? Well, the foundation of that principle when you're writing an essay is don't lie, right? Don't pretend to be something you're not. So I guess I managed to wrap that back around to be topical. Hail Hydra. To conduct life like this, which is to say in the sort of scheming and political way that Jordan Peterson was describing in the previous paragraph before I went on my tangent, to conduct life like this is to become possessed by some ill-formed desire, and then to craft speech and action in a manner that appears likely, rationally, to bring about that end. Hail Hydra. Typical calculated ends might include to impose my ideological beliefs, to prove that I am, or that I was, right, to appear competent, to ratchet myself up the dominant hierarchy, to avoid responsibility, or its twin, to garner credit for others' actions, to be promoted, to attract the lion's share of attention, to ensure that everyone likes me, to garner the benefits of martyrdom, to justify my cynicism, to rationalize my antisocial outlook, to minimize immediate conflict, to maintain my naivete, to capitalize on my vulnerability, to always appear as the sainted one, or, this one is particularly evil, to ensure that it is always my unloved child's fault. Hail Hydra. These are all examples of what Sigmund Freud's compatriot, the lesser-known Austrian psychologist Alfred Adler, called life lies. Hail Hydra. Someone living a life lie is attempting to manipulate reality with perception, thought, and action, so that only some narrowly desired and predefined outcome is allowed to exist. Hail Hydra. A life lived in this manner is based, consciously or unconsciously, on two premises. Hail Hydra. The first is that current knowledge is sufficient to define what is good, unquestioningly, into the far future. Hail Hydra. And the second is that reality would be unbearable if left to its own devices. Hail Hydra. The first presumption is philosophically unjustifiable. What you are currently aiming at might not be worth attaining, just as what you are currently doing might be an error. Hail Hydra. And the second is even worse. Hail Hydra, it is valid only if reality is intrinsically intolerable and simultaneously something that can be successfully manipulated and distorted. Hail Hydra, such speaking and thinking requires the arrogance and certainty that the English poet John Milton's genius identified with Satan, God's highest angel, gone most spectacularly wrong. Hail Hydra. The faculty of rationality inclines dangerously to pride. All I know is all that needs to be known. Hail Hydra. Pride falls in love with its own creations and tries to make them absolute. Hail Hydra. I have seen people define their utopia and then bend their lives into knots trying to make it reality. Hail Hydra. A left-leaning, of course that's pretty much the story of the 20th century. A left-leaning student adopts a trendy, anti-authority stance and spends the next 20 years working resentfully to topple the windmills of his imagination. Hail Hydra. An 18-year-old decides arbitrarily that she wants to retire at 52. Hail Hydra. She works for 3 decades to make that happen, failing to notice that she made that decision when she was little more than a child. Hail Hydra. What did she know about her 52-year-old self when she was still a teenager? Hail Hydra. Even now, many years later, she has only the vaguest, lowest resolution idea of her post-work Eden. She refuses to notice. Hail Hydra. What did her life mean if that initial goal was wrong? Hail Hydra. She's afraid of opening Pandora's box where all the troubles of the world reside. Hail Hydra, but hope is in there too. Hail Hydra. Instead, she warps her life to fit the fantasies of a sheltered adolescent. Hail Hydra. In fact, I recognize that I missed a couple of Hail Hydras, so let's do 3 for all the Hail Hydras I missed. Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra. A naively formulated goal transmutes with time into the sinister form of the life lie. Hail Hydra. One 40-something client told me his vision, formulated by his younger self. I see myself retired, sitting on a tropical beach, drinking margaritas in a sunshine. Hail Hydra. That's not a plan. Hail Hydra. That's a travel poster. Hail Hydra. After 8 margaritas, you're fit only to await the hangover. Hail Hydra. After 3 weeks of margarita-filled days, if you have any sense, you're bored stiff and self-disgusted. Hail Hydra. In a year or less, you're pathetic. Hail Hydra. You know, I was thinking recently that hell is probably a cruise ship. Probably for this exact reason, in that all you do is indulge in the banal, sensual pleasures of life until you get so bored out of your mind that all you want to do is escape. But the thing about a cruise ship is you can't escape because you're surrounded by the oceans. And the worst part of it is you chose it for yourself. You chose it for yourself. So you're stuck there because of your own bad decision to indulge in your own perverted sense of a good life. So I think hell is very much like a cruise ship, or at least, you know, the ferry that you board in order to cross the river Styx. At least that much is a cruise ship. The saddest thing about it is you chose it for yourself. That's something that's really sort of gripped me about, you know, all these Catholic priests that I've been listening to, and especially, you know, the C.S. Lewis essays, this idea that you choose hell for yourself in the same way that you choose to have faith in God. That's something that Norm Macdonald said in one of his interviews with Larry King. You choose to have faith. One path leads to heaven, as it were, and the other leads to just a cruise ship. Where was I? Ah, yes. You're bored, stiff, and self-disgusted. In a year or less, you're pathetic. Hail Hydra. It's just not a sustainable approach to later life, all this margarita drinking. Hail Hydra. This kind of oversimplification and falsification is particularly typical of ideologues. Hail Hydra. They adopt a single axiom. Government is bad. Immigration is bad. Capitalism is bad. Patriarchy is bad. Patriarchy is bad. Hail Hydra. Then they filter and screen their experiences and insist ever more narrowly that everything can be explained by that axiom. Hail Hydra. They believe, narcissistically, underneath all that bad theory, that the world could be put right if only they held the controls. Hail Hydra. And there is another fundamental problem too with the life lie, particularly when it is based on avoidance. Hail Hydra. A sin of commission occurs when you do something you know to be wrong. Hail Hydra. A sin of omission occurs when you let something bad happen when you could do something to stop it. Hail Hydra. The former is regarded classically as more serious than the latter, than avoidance. Hail Hydra. I'm not so sure. Hail Hydra. Consider the person who insists that everything is right in her life. Hail Hydra. She avoids conflict and smiles and does what she is asked to do. Hail Hydra. She finds a niche and hides in it. Hail Hydra. She does not question authority or put her own ideas forward and does not complain when mistreated. Hail Hydra. She strives for invisibility like a fish in the center of a swarming school. Hail Hydra. But a secret unrest gnaws at her heart. Hail Hydra. She is still suffering because life is suffering. Hail Hydra. She is lonesome and isolated and unfulfilled. Hail Hydra. But her obedience and self-obliteration eliminate all the meaning from her life. Hail Hydra. She has become nothing but a slave, a tool for others to exploit. Hail Hydra. She does not get what she wants or needs because doing so would mean speaking her mind. Hail Hydra. So there is nothing of value in her existence to counterbalance life's troubles. Hail Hydra. And that makes her sick. Hail Hydra. It might be the noisy troublemakers who disappear first when the institution you serve falters and shrinks. Hail Hydra. But it's the invisible who will be sacrificed next. Hail Hydra. Someone hiding is not someone vital. Vitality requires original contribution, Hail Hydra. Hiding also does not save the conforming and conventional from dis-ease, insanity, death, and taxes. Hail Hydra. Like how taxes comes after death. Hail Hydra. And hiding from others also means suppressing and hiding the potentialities of the unrealized self. Hail Hydra. And that's the problem. Hail Hydra. If you will not reveal yourself to others, you cannot reveal yourself to yourself, Hail Hydra. That does not only mean that you suppress who you are, although it also means that, Hail Hydra. It means that so much of what you could be will never be forced by necessity to come forward. Hail Hydra. This is a biological truth as well as a conceptual truth. Hail Hydra. When you explore boldly, when you voluntarily confront the unknown, you gather information and build your renewed self out of that information. Hail Hydra. That is the conceptual element. Hail Hydra. However, researchers have recently discovered that new genes in the central nervous system turn themselves on when an organism is placed, or places itself, in a new situation. Hail Hydra. These genes code for new proteins, and these proteins are the building blocks for new structures in the brain. Hail Hydra. This means that a lot of you is still nascent, in the most physical of senses, and will not be called forth by stasis. Hail Hydra. You have to say something, go somewhere, and do things to get turned on, so to speak. Hail Hydra. And if not, you remain incomplete. You remain turned off, shut down. And life is too hard for anyone who is incomplete. And turned off and shut down, I suppose. Hail Hydra. If you say no to your boss, or your spouse, or your mother, when it needs to be said, then you transform yourself into someone who can say no when it needs to be said. Hail Hydra. If you say yes when no needs to be said, however, you transform yourself into someone who can only say yes, even when it is very clearly time to say no. Hail Hydra. If you ever wonder how perfectly ordinary, decent people could find themselves doing the terrible things that the Gulag camp guards did, well, now you have your answer. Hail Hydra. By the time no seriously needed to be said, there was no one left capable of saying it. Hail Hydra. If you betray yourself, if you say untrue things, if you act out a lie, you weaken your character. Hail Hydra. And if you have a weak character, then adversity will mow you down when it happens, when it appears, as it will inevitably. Hail Hydra. You will hide, but there will be no place left to hide. Hail Hydra. And then you will find yourself doing terrible things. Hail Hydra. Only the most cynical, hopeless philosophy insists that reality could be improved through falsification. Hail Hydra. Such a philosophy judges capital B being and becoming alike and deems them flawed. Hail Hydra. It denounces truth as insufficient and the honest man as deluded. Hail Hydra. It is a philosophy that both brings about and then justifies the endemic corruption of the world. Hail Hydra. It is not a vision as such, and not a plan devised to achieve a vision that is at fault under such circumstances. Hail Hydra. A vision of the future, the desirable future, is necessary. Hail Hydra. Such a vision links action taken now with important, long-term, foundational values. Hail Hydra. It lends actions in the present significance and importance. Hail Hydra. It provides a frame limiting uncertainty and anxiety. Hail Hydra. It's not vision. Hail Hydra. It is instead willful blindness. Hail Hydra. It's the worst sort of lie. Hail Hydra. It's subtle. Hail Hydra. It avails itself of easy rationalizations. Hail Hydra. Willful blindness is the refusal to know something that could be known. Hail Hydra. It's refusal to admit that the knocking sound means someone at the door. Hail Hydra. It's refusal to acknowledge the 800-pound gorilla in the room, the elephant under the carpet, the skeleton in the closet. Hail Hydra. It's refusal to admit to error while pursuing the plan. Hail Hydra. Every game has rules. Hail Hydra. Some of the most important rules are implicit. Hail Hydra. You accept them merely by deciding to play the game. Hail Hydra. The first of these rules is that the game is important. Hail Hydra. If it wasn't important, you wouldn't be playing it. Hail Hydra. Playing a game defines it as important. Hail Hydra. The second is that moves undertaken during the game are valid if they help you win. Hail Hydra. If you make a move and it isn't helping you win, then, by definition, it's a bad move. Hail Hydra. You need to try something different. Hail Hydra. You remember the old joke. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over while expecting different results. Hail Hydra. If you're lucky and you fail and you try something new, you move ahead. Hail Hydra. If that doesn't work, you try something different again. Hail Hydra. A minor modification will suffice in fortunate circumstances. Hail Hydra. It is therefore prudent to begin with small changes. See if they help. Hail Hydra. Sometimes, however, the entire hierarchy of values is faulty, and the whole edifice has to be abandoned. Hail Hydra. The whole game must be changed. Hail Hydra. That's a revolution, with all the chaos and terror of a revolution. Hail Hydra. It's not something to be engaged in lightly, but it's sometimes necessary. Hail Hydra. Error, and I think he's talking more in the vein of like the American Revolution than the French Revolution, let's say. Error necessitates sacrifice to correct it. And serious error necessitates serious sacrifice. Hail Hydra. To accept the truth means to sacrifice. And if you have rejected the truth for a long time, then you've run up a dangerously large sacrificial debt. Hail Hydra. Forest fires burn out dead wood and return trapped elements to the soil. Hail Hydra. Sometimes, however, fires are suppressed artificially. Hail Hydra. That does not stop the dead wood from accumulating. Hail Hydra. Sooner or later a fire will start. Hail Hydra. And when it does, it will burn so hot that everything will be destroyed, even the soil in which the forest grows. Hail Hydra. The prideful, rational mind, comfortable with its certainty, enamored of its own brilliance, is easily tempted to ignore error and to sweep dirt under the rug. Hail Hydra. Literary existential philosophers, beginning with Soren Kierkegaard, conceived of this mode of capital B being as inauthentic. Hail Hydra. An inauthentic person continues to perceive and act in ways his own experience has demonstrated false. Hail Hydra. He does not speak with his own voice. Hail Hydra. Did what I want happen? Hail Hydra. No. Hail Hydra. Then my aim or my methods were wrong. Hail Hydra. I still have something to learn. Hail Hydra. That is the voice of authenticity. Hail Hydra. Did what I want happen? Hail Hydra. No. Hail Hydra. Then the world is unfair. Hail Hydra. People are jealous and too stupid to understand. Hail Hydra. It is the fault of something or someone else. Hail Hydra. That is the voice of inauthenticity. Hail Hydra. It is not too far from there to, well, they should be stopped. Or, they must be hurt. Or, they must be destroyed. Hail Hydra. Whenever you hear about something incomprehensibly brutal, such ideas have manifested themselves. Hail Hydra. You know, it's been so interesting to see the rebirth of anti-Semitic violent attacks in America. I feel like I mentioned this before. but Andrew Klavan is the only Daily Wire host who I really don't watch at all. But every time that I, accidentally, let's say, stumble on a clip of him, or I watch him on the Daily Wire backstage where he's, in with the other hosts, he always drops some sort of wisdom. And he was saying how after the Holocaust, the Jews were sort of on holiday, and that this history that spans pretty much the entire recorded history of mankind itself, of anti-Semitism, of violence against the Jewish people, finally got a little bit of a reprieve after the unbelievable horror of the Holocaust, right? People finally got a grip of what racial and religious intolerance and bigotry leads to. But the holiday's over, it seems. That's what Andrew Klavan says. And it's back to beating up the Jews in open daylight and getting away with it, scot-free, apparently. And you see something similar with the rise of BLM over this past year. You see an increased number of hate crimes being perpetrated on white people, but the criminals aren't arrested or punished in any significant way because apparently racism against white people is completely acceptable. And it's an unbelievable state of affairs that this is being tolerated in Western civilizations. And you hear more and more this voice of inauthenticity building into more and more of a cultural force of people saying it is the fault of something or someone else, whether it's something as stupid as white privilege or sexism or racism or any of this other nonsense that no longer applies in the Western world. They say the world is unfair. People are too stupid to understand why I am incompetent. And then, of course, more and more you hear, they should be stopped. They must be hurt. They must be destroyed. I guess I'll talk about that more later at the end of this chapter. There is no blaming any of this on unconsciousness either, or repression. Hail Hydra. When the individual lies, he knows it. Hail Hydra. He may blind himself to the consequences of his actions. Hail Hydra. He may fail to analyze and articulate his past so that he does not understand. Hail Hydra. He may even forget that he lied and so be unconscious of that fact. Hail Hydra. But he was conscious in the present during the commission of each error and the omission of each responsibility. Hail Hydra. At that moment, he knew what he was up to. Hail Hydra. And the sins of the inauthentic individual compound and corrupt the state. Hail Hydra. Someone power-hungry makes a new rule at your workplace. Hail Hydra. It's unnecessary. Hail Hydra. It's counterproductive. Hail Hydra. It's an irritant. Hail Hydra. It removes some of the pleasure and the meaning from your work. Hail Hydra. But you tell yourself, well, it's all right. Hail Hydra. It's not worth complaining about. Hail Hydra. Well, then it happens again. Hail Hydra. You've already trained yourself to allow such things. By failing to react the first time. Hail Hydra. You're a little less courageous. Hail Hydra. Your opponent, unopposed, is a little stronger. Hail Hydra. The institution is a little bit more corrupt. Hail Hydra. The process of bureaucratic stagnation and oppression is underway, and you've contributed by pretending that it was okay. Hail Hydra. Well, why not complain? Hail Hydra. Why not take a stand? Hail Hydra. If you do, other people, equally afraid to speak up, may come to your defense. Hail Hydra. And if not, maybe it's time for a revolution. Hail Hydra. Maybe you should find a job somewhere else where your soul is less in danger from corruption. Hail Hydra. For what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? And that's Mark chapter 8, verse 36. The same verse, by the way, that I quoted in my Guild Wars 2 video that I recently made. And I think I've plugged that video in a previous rule, so I'm not going to repeat what that video was about, but I do like Mark 8:36 a lot, and if you want to hear me talk about it in more depth, then you can go check out that video. One of the major contributions of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's masterwork, The Gulag Archipelago, was his analysis of the direct causal relationship between the pathology of the Soviet prison work camp dependent state, where millions suffered and died, and the almost universal proclivity of the Soviet citizen to falsify his own day-to-day personal experience, deny his own state-induced suffering, and thereby prop up the dictates of the rational, ideology-possessed communist system. Hail Hydra. And it was this bad faith, this denial, that in Solzhenitsyn's opinion aided and abetted that great paranoid mass murderer, Joseph Stalin, in his crimes. Hail Hydra. Solzhenitsyn wrote the truth, his truth, hard learned through his own experiences in the camps, exposing the lies of the Soviet state. Hail Hydra. No educated person dared defend that ideology again after Solzhenitsyn published the Gulag Archipelago. Hail Hydra. No one could ever say again, well, what Stalin did, that was not true communism. Hail Hydra. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Nazi concentration camp survivor who wrote the classic Man's Search for Meaning, drew a similar social psychological conclusion: deceitful, inauthentic individual existence is the precursor to social totalitarianism. Hail Hydra. And Sigmund Freud, for his part, analogously believed that repression contributed in a non-trivial manner to the development of mental illness, and the difference between repression of truth and a lie is a matter of degree, not of kind. Hail Hydra. Alfred Adler knew it was lies that bred sickness. Hail Hydra. Carl Jung knew that moral problems plagued his patients, and that such problems were caused by untruth. Hail Hydra. All these thinkers, all centrally concerned with pathology, both individual and cultural, came to the same conclusion. Lies warp the structure of capital B being. Hail Hydra. Untruth corrupts the soul and the state alike, and one form of corruption feeds the other. Hail Hydra. I have repeatedly observed the transformation of mere existential misery into outright hell by betrayal and deceit. Hail Hydra. The barely manageable crisis of a parent's terminal illness can be turned, for example, into something awful beyond description by the unseemly and petty squabbling of the sufferer's adult children. Hail Hydra. Obsessed by the unresolved past, they gather like ghouls around the deathbed, forcing tragedy into an unholy dalliance with cowardice and resentment. Hail Hydra. The inability of a son to thrive independently is exploited by a mother bent on shielding her child from all disappointment and pain. Hail Hydra. He never leaves. She is never lonely. Hail Hydra. It's an evil conspiracy, forged slowly, as the pathology unfolds by thousands of knowing winks and nods. She plays the martyr, doomed to support her son, and garners nourishing sympathy like a vampire from supporting friends. Hail Hydra. He broods in his basements, imagining himself oppressed. Hail Hydra. He fantasizes with delight about the havoc he might wreak on the world that rejected him for his cowardice, awkwardness, and inability. Hail Hydra. And sometimes he wreaks precisely that havoc, Hail Hydra, and everyone asks, why? Hail Hydra. Well, they could know, but refused to. Hail Hydra. Even well-lived lives can, of course, be warped and hurt and twisted by illness and infirmity and uncontrollable catastrophe. Hail Hydra. Depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia, like cancer, all involve biological factors beyond the individual's immediate control. Hail Hydra. The difficulties intrinsic to life itself are sufficient to weaken and overwhelm each of us, pushing us beyond our limits, breaking us at our weakest point. Hail Hydra. Not even the best lived life provides an absolute defense against vulnerability. Hail Hydra. But the family that fights in the ruins of their earthquake-devastated dwelling place is much less likely to rebuild. than the family made strong by mutual trust and devotion. Hail Hydra. Any natural weakness or existential challenge, no matter how minor, can be magnified into a serious crisis with enough deceit in the individual, family, or culture. Hail Hydra. The honest human spirit may continually fail in its attempts to bring about paradise on earth. Hail Hydra, it may manage, however, to reduce the suffering attendant on existence to bearable levels. Hail Hydra, the tragedy of capital B being is the consequence of our limitations and the vulnerability defining human experience. Hail Hydra, it may even be the price we pay for capital B being itself, since existence must be limited to be at all. Hail Hydra. I have seen a husband adapt honestly and courageously while his wife descended into terminal dementia. Hail Hydra. He made the necessary adjustments step by step. Hail Hydra. He accepted help when he needed it. Hail Hydra. He refused to deny her sad deterioration and in that manner adapted gracefully to it. Hail Hydra. I saw the family of that same woman come together in a supporting and sustaining manner as she lay dying, and gain newfound connections with each other, brother, sisters, grandchildren, and father, as partial but genuine compensation for their loss. Hail Hydra. I'm pretty sure he's talking about his mother-in-law there, actually. I think I've seen clips or interviews with Jordan Peterson where he's talking about this story, and I'm pretty sure he says that it's his wife's mother who is going through this. I might be wrong though. Hail Hydra, I have seen my teenage daughter live through the destruction of her hip and her ankle and survive 2 years of continual intense pain and emerge with her spirit intact. Hail Hydra, I watched her younger brother voluntarily and without resentment sacrifice many opportunities for friendship and social engagement to stand by her and us while she suffered. Hail Hydra, with love, encouragement, and character intact, a human being can be resilient beyond imagining. Hail Hydra. What cannot be borne, however, is the absolute ruin produced by tragedy and deception. Hail Hydra. The capacity of the rational mind to deceive, manipulate, scheme, trick, falsify, minimize, mislead, betray, prevaricate, deny, omit, rationalize, bias, exaggerate, and obscure is so endless, so remarkable, that centuries of pre-scientific thought, concentrating on clarifying the nature of moral endeavor, regarded it as positively demonic. Hail Hydra. This is not because of rationality itself as a process, Hail Hydra. That process can produce clarity and progress, Hail Hydra. It is because rationality is subject to the single worst temptation, to raise what it knows now to the status of an absolute. Hail Hydra. We can turn once again to the great poet John Milton to clarify just what this means. Hail Hydra. Over thousands of years of history, the Western world wrapped a dream-like fantasy about the nature of evil around its central religious core. Hail Hydra. That fantasy had a protagonist, an adversarial personality, absolutely dedicated to the corruption of capital B being. Hail Hydra. Milton took it upon himself to organize, dramatize, and articulate the essence of this collective dream and gave it life in the figure of Satan, Lucifer, the light bearer. Hail Hydra. He writes of Lucifer's primal temptation and its immediate consequences. He trusted to have equaled the Most High if he opposed, and with ambitious aim against the throne and monarchy of God, raised impious war in heaven and battle proud with vain attempt. Him the almighty power hurled headlong flaming from the ethereal sky with hideous ruin and combustion down to bottomless perdition, there to dwell in adamantine chains and penal fire. Lucifer, The spirit of reason, in Milton's eyes, was the most wondrous angel brought forth from the void by God. Hail Hydra, and this can be read psychologically. Hail Hydra, reason is something alive. Hail Hydra, it lives in all of us. Hail Hydra, it's older than any of us. Hail Hydra. It's best understood as a personality, not a faculty. Hail Hydra. It has its aims, and its temptations, and its weaknesses. Hail Hydra. It flies higher and sees farther than any other spirit. Hail Hydra, but reason falls in love with itself. And worse, Hail Hydra, it falls in love with its own productions. Hail Hydra. It elevates them and worships them as absolutes. Hail Hydra. Lucifer is therefore the spirit of totalitarianism. Hail Hydra, he is flung from heaven into hell because such elevation, such rebellion against the highest and incomprehensible inevitably produces hell. Hail Hydra. To say it again, it is the greatest temptation of the rational faculty to glorify its own capacity and its own productions, and to claim that in the face of its theories, nothing transcendent or outside its domain need exist. Hail Hydra. This means that all important facts have been discovered. Hail Hydra. This means that nothing important remains unknown. Hail Hydra. But most importantly, it means denial of the necessity for courageous individual confrontation with capital B being. Hail Hydra. What is going to save you? Hail Hydra. The totalitarian says, in essence, well, you must rely on faith in what you already know. Hail Hydra. But that is not what saves. Hail Hydra. What saves is the willingness to learn from what you don't know. Hail Hydra. That is faith in the possibility of human transformation. Hail Hydra. That is faith in the sacrifice of the current self for the self that could be. Hail Hydra. The totalitarian denies the necessity for the individual to take ultimate responsibility for capital B being. Hail Hydra. Well, that denial is the meaning of rebellion against the Most High. Hail Hydra. That is what totalitarian means. Everything that needs to be discovered has been discovered. Hail Hydra. Everything will unfold precisely as planned. Hail Hydra. All, the totality of problems will vanish forever once the perfect system is accepted. Milton's great poem was a prophecy, Hail Hydra. As rationality rose ascendant from the ashes of Christianity, the great threat of total systems accompanied it. Hail Hydra. Communism, in particular, was attractive not so much to its hypothetical beneficiaries, the oppressed worker, but to intellectuals, to those whose arrogant pride in intellect assured them that they were always right. Hail Hydra. But the promised utopia never emerged. Hail Hydra. Instead, humanity experienced the inferno of Stalinist Russia, Maoist China, Pol Pot's Cambodia, and the citizens of those states were required to betray their own experience, turn against their fellow citizens, and die in the tens of millions. Hail Hydra. There is an old Soviet joke. Hail Hydra. An American dies and goes to hell. Hail Hydra. Satan himself shows the American around. Hail Hydra. They pass a large cauldron. Hail Hydra. The American peers in. It's full of suffering souls, burning in hot pitch. Hail Hydra. As they struggle to leave the pot, low-ranking devils sitting on the rim pitchfork them back in. Hail Hydra. And the American is properly shocked. Hail Hydra. Satan says, that's where we put the sinful Englishman. Hail Hydra. The tour continues. Hail Hydra. Soon the duo approaches a second cauldron. Hail Hydra. It's slightly larger and slightly hotter. Hail Hydra. The American peers in. Hail Hydra. It's also full of suffering souls, and each one wears a beret. Hail Hydra. Devils are pitchforking would-be escapees back into this cauldron as well. Hail Hydra. That's where we put sinful Frenchmen, Satan says. Hail Hydra. In the distance is a third cauldron, Hail Hydra. It's much bigger and is glowing, white hot. Hail Hydra, the American can barely get near it. Nonetheless, at Satan's insistence, he approaches it and peers in. Hail Hydra, it is absolutely packed with souls, barely visible under the surface of the boiling liquid. Hail Hydra, now and then, however, one clambers out of the pitch and desperately reaches for the rim. Hail Hydra, oddly, there are no devils sitting on the edge of this giant pot. But the clamberer disappears back under the surface anyway. Hail Hydra, the American asks, why are there no demons here to keep everyone from escaping? Hail Hydra, and Satan replies, oh, this is where we put the Russians. If one tries to escape, the others pull him back in. Hail Hydra. Kind of kills the joke to keep interrupting it with Hail Hydra. Milton believed that stubborn refusal to change in the face of error not only meant ejection from heaven and subsequent degeneration into an ever-deepening hell, but the rejection of redemption itself. Hail Hydra. Satan knows full well that even if he was willing to seek reconciliation, and God willing to grant it, which he probably would be, to be fair, he would only rebel again, because he will not change. Hail Hydra. Perhaps it is this prideful stubbornness that constitutes the mysterious, unforgivable sin against the Holy Ghost. He goes into another quote. Farewell, happy field where joy forever dwells. Hail, horrors. Hail, infernal world, and thou, profoundest hell, receive thy new possessor, one who brings a mind not to be changed by place or time. Wow. Hail Hydra, this is no afterlife fantasy. Hail Hydra, this is no perverse realm of post-existence torture for political enemies. Hail Hydra, this is an abstract idea. And abstractions are often more real than what they represent. Hail Hydra. The idea that hell exists in some metaphysical manner is not only ancient and pervasive, it's true. Hail Hydra. Hell is eternal. Hail Hydra. It has always existed. Hail Hydra. It exists now. Hail Hydra, it's the most barren, hopeless, and malevolent subdivision of the underworld of chaos, where disappointed and resentful people forever dwell. Hail Hydra. He goes into another quote. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. Here we may reign secure, and in my choice to reign is worth ambition though in hell. Better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. Good God, this is... Oh, I need to read John Milton then. Hail Hydra. Those who have lied enough in word and action live there in hell. Now, Hail Hydra. Take a walk down any busy urban street. Hail Hydra. And he specifically talks about a street in Toronto where there's a lot of homeless people, a lot of crack addicts, stuff like that, in interviews and such. I guess he decided to keep it abstract, as it were, talking about it in a book that is being internationally published. Hail Hydra. Keep your eyes open and pay attention. Hail Hydra. You will see people who are in hell right now. Hail Hydra. These are the people to whom you instinctively give a wide berth. Hail Hydra. These are the people who are immediately angered if you direct your gaze toward them, although sometimes they will instead turn away in shame. Hail Hydra. I saw a horribly damaged street alcoholic do exactly that in the presence of my young daughter. Hail Hydra. He wanted above all to avoid seeing his degraded state incontrovertibly reflected in her eyes. Hail Hydra. It is deceit that makes people miserable beyond what they can bear. Hail Hydra. It is deceit that fills human souls with resentment and vengefulness. Hail Hydra. It is deceit that produces the terrible suffering of mankind, the death camps of the Nazis, the torture chambers and genocides of Stalin, and that even greater monster, Mao. Hail Hydra. It was deceit that killed hundreds of millions of people in the 20th century, Hail Hydra. It was deceit that almost doomed civilization itself. Hail Hydra. It is deceit that still threatens us most profoundly today. Hail Hydra. Yeah, I find it interesting that we keep sort of recycling Mao, Hitler, Stalin as a trinity of evil. When, there's a lot of other examples around the world. Of course, Pol Pot comes to mind. The commies in Cuba and Venezuela obviously come to mind. But there's also a lot of socialist nations that arose in post-colonial Africa that engendered plenty of massacres in its own right through the same totalitarian beliefs. Africa didn't have Gandhi, as it were, to ease peacefully the transition from colonial rule to self-governed rule. And so Africa had a much bloodier, much more gruesome, much more turbulent adolescence into the continent that we know it as today. I feel like the case is weakened if we keep resorting to the same old examples over and over again, even though, the trinity, as it were, the evil trinity, easily racked up a body count over 100 million people. For some, it's just, but those are just the most evil people. And it's not always like this. They'll keep going back to that's not real communism argument. But no, socialism, no matter at what point in time, as soon as you try and group people into a social category, whether it's based on your skin color or your economic position, and then you allocate, status and value based on that group identity, as soon as you do that, you're gonna kill a lot of people one way or another. Part 4. Well, the truth, instead. What happens if, instead, we decide to stop lying? Hail Hydra. What does this even mean? Hail Hydra. We are limited in our knowledge, after all. Hail Hydra. We must make decisions here and now, even though the best means and the best goals can never be discerned with certainty. Hail Hydra. An aim, an ambition provides the structure necessary for action. Hail Hydra. An aim provides a destination, a point of contrast against the present, and a framework within which all things can be evaluated. Hail Hydra. An aim defines progress and makes such progress exciting. Hail Hydra. An aim reduces anxiety, because if you have no aim, everything can mean anything or nothing. And neither of those two options makes for a tranquil spirit. Hail Hydra. Thus, we have to think and plan and limit and posit in order to live at all. Hail Hydra. How then to envision the future and to establish our direction without falling prey to the temptation of totalitarian certainty? Hail Hydra. Some reliance on tradition can help us establish our aims. Hail Hydra. It is reasonable to do what other people have always done, unless we have a very good reason not to. Hail Hydra. It is reasonable to become educated and work and find love and have a family. Hail Hydra. That is how culture maintains itself. Hail Hydra. But it is necessary to aim at your targets, however traditional, with your eyes wide open. Hail Hydra. You have a direction, but it might be wrong. Hail Hydra. You have a plan, but it might be ill-formed. Hail Hydra. You may have been led astray by your own ignorance, and worse, by your own unrevealed corruption. Hail Hydra. You must make friends, therefore, with what you don't know, instead of what you know. Hail Hydra. You must remain awake to catch yourself in the act. Hail Hydra. You must remove the beam in your own eye before you concern yourself with the mote in your brother's. Hail Hydra. Another quote from Christ. And in this way you strengthen your own spirit so it can tolerate the burden of existence, and you rejuvenate the state. Hail Hydra. The ancient Egyptians had already figured this out thousands of years ago, although their knowledge remained embodied in dramatic form. Hail Hydra. They worshipped Osiris, mythological founder of the state and the god of tradition. Hail Hydra. Osiris, however, was vulnerable and was overthrown and banished to the underworld by Set, his evil scheming brother. Hail Hydra. The Egyptians represented in story the fact that social organizations ossify with time and tend towards willful blindness. Hail Hydra. Osiris would not see his brother's true character, even though he could have. Hail Hydra. Set waits and, at an opportune moment, attacks. Hail Hydra. He hacks Osiris into pieces and scatters the divine remains through the kingdom. Hail Hydra. He sends his brother's spirit to the underworld. Hail Hydra. He makes it very difficult for Osiris to pull himself back together. Hail Hydra. Fortunately, the great king did not have to deal with Set on his own. Hail Hydra. The Egyptians also worshipped Horus, the son of Osiris. Hail Hydra. Horus took the twin forms of a falcon, the most visually acute of all creatures, and the still famous hieroglyphic single Egyptian eye, as alluded to in Rule 7. Hail Hydra. Osiris is tradition, aged and willfully blind. Hail Hydra. Horus, his son, could, and would, by contrast, see. Hail Hydra. Horus was the god of attention. Hail Hydra. This was not the same as rationality. Hail Hydra. Because he paid attention, Horus could perceive and triumph against the evils of Set, his uncle, albeit at great cost. Hail Hydra. When Horus confronts Set, they have a terrible battle. Hail Hydra. Before Set's defeats and banishments from the kingdom, he tears out one of his nephew's eyes. Hail Hydra. But the eventually victorious Horus takes back the eye. Then he does something truly unexpected. He journeys voluntarily into the underworld and gives the eye to his father. Hail Hydra. What does this mean? First, that the encounter with malevolence and evil is of sufficient terror to damage even the vision of a god. And second, that the attentive son can restore the vision of his father. Hail Hydra. Culture is always in a near-dead state, even though it was established by the spirit of great people in the past. Hail Hydra. But the present is not the past. Hail Hydra. The wisdom of the past deteriorates or becomes outdated in proportion to the genuine difference between the conditions of the present and the past. Hail Hydra. That is a mere consequence of the passage of time and the change that passage inevitably brings. Hail Hydra. But it is also the case that culture and its wisdom is additionally vulnerable to corruption, to voluntary, willful blindness, and Mephistophelian intrigue. Hail Hydra. Thus, the inevitable functional decline of the institutions granted to us by our ancestors is sped along by our misbehavior, our missing of the mark, our sin in the present. Hail Hydra. Jordan Peterson talks about this elsewhere, that the etymology of the word, the name Satan, is directly linked to Set, right? So when he describes Set as being Mephistophelian, he's actually saying that very literally, in that Set actually is the personification in the Egyptian mythos of Satan, of Satan's pride, of Satan's arrogance, of Satan's conviction of corrupting capital B being out of resentment. Hail Hydra. It is our responsibility to see what is before our eyes, courageously, and to learn from it, even if it seems horrible, even if the horror of seeing it damages our consciousness and half blinds us. Hail Hydra. The act of seeing is particularly important when it challenges what we know and rely on, upsetting and destabilizing us. Hail Hydra. It is the act of seeing that informs the individual and updates the state. Hail Hydra. It is for this reason that Nietzsche. It was for this reason that Nietzsche said that a man's worth was determined by how much truth he could tolerate. Hail Hydra. You are by no means only what you already know, Hail Hydra. You are also all that which you could know, if only you would. Hail Hydra. Thus, you should never sacrifice what you could be for what you are. Hail Hydra. You should never give up the better that resides within for the security you already have. And certainly not when you have already caught a glimpse, an undeniable glimpse of something beyond. Hail Hydra. In the Christian tradition, Christ is identified with the Logos. Hail Hydra. The Logos is the Word of God. Hail Hydra. That Word transformed chaos into order at the beginning of time, Hail Hydra. In his human form, Christ sacrificed himself voluntarily to the truth, to the good, to God. Hail Hydra. In consequence, he died and was reborn. Hail Hydra. The Word that produces order from chaos sacrifices everything, even itself, to God. Hail Hydra. That single sentence, wise beyond comprehension, sums up Christianity. Hail Hydra. Every bit of learning is a little death. Hail Hydra. Every bit of new information challenges a previous conception, forcing it to dissolve into chaos before it can be reborn as something better. Hail Hydra. And sometimes such deaths virtually destroy us. Hail Hydra. In such cases, we might never recover. Or, if we do, we change a lot. Hail Hydra. A good friend of mine discovered that his wife of decades was having an affair. Hail Hydra. He didn't see it coming. Hail Hydra. It plunged him into a deep depression. Hail Hydra. He descended into the underworld. Hail Hydra. He told me at one point, I always thought that people who were depressed should just shake it off. Hail Hydra. I didn't have any idea what I was talking about. Hail Hydra. Eventually, he returned from the depths. Hail Hydra. In many ways, he was a new man, and perhaps a wiser and better man. Hail Hydra. He lost 40 pounds. Hail Hydra. He ran a marathon. Hail Hydra. He traveled to Africa and climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. Hail Hydra. He chose rebirth over descent into hell. Hail Hydra. Set your ambitions, even if you are uncertain about what they should be. Hail Hydra. The better ambitions have to do with the development of character and ability, rather than status and power. Hail Hydra. Status you can lose. You carry character with you wherever you go, and it allows you to prevail against adversity. Hail Hydra. Knowing this, tie a rope to a boulder. Hail Hydra. Pick up the great stone, heave it in front of you, and pull yourself towards it. Hail Hydra. Watch and observe while you move forward. Hail Hydra. Articulate your experience as clearly and carefully to yourself and others as you possibly can. Hail Hydra. In this manner, you will learn to proceed more effectively and efficiently towards your goal. Hail Hydra. And while you are doing this, do not lie. Hail Hydra, especially to yourself. Hail Hydra. If you pay attention to what you do and say, you can learn to feel a state of internal division and weakness when you are misbehaving and misspeaking. Hail Hydra. It's an embodied sensation, not a thought. Hail Hydra. I experience an internal sensation of sinking and division, rather than solidity and strength, when I am incautious with my acts and words. Hail Hydra. It seems to be centered in my solar plexus, where a large knot of nervous tissue resides. Hail Hydra. I learned to recognize when I was lying, in fact, by noticing this sinking and division, and then inferring the presence of a lie. Hail Hydra. It often took me a long time to ferret out the deception. Hail Hydra. Sometimes I was using words for appearance. Hail Hydra. Sometimes I was trying to disguise my own true ignorance of the topic at hand. Hail Hydra. Sometimes I was using the words of others to avoid the responsibility of thinking for myself. Hail Hydra. If you pay attention, when you are seeking something, you will move towards your goal. Hail Hydra. More importantly, however, you will acquire the information that allows your goal itself to transform. Hail Hydra. A totalitarian never asks, well, what if my current ambition is in error? Hail Hydra. He treats it instead as the capital A absolute, the capital T totality. Hail Hydra. It becomes his God for all intents and purposes. Hail Hydra. It constitutes his highest value. Hail Hydra. It regulates his emotions and motivational states and determines his thoughts. Hail Hydra. All people serve their ambition. Hail Hydra. In that matter, there are no atheists. Hail Hydra. There are only people who know and those who don't know which God they serve. Hail Hydra. If you bend everything totally, blindly, and willfully towards the attainment of a goal and only that goal, you will never be able to discover if another goal would serve you and the world better. Hail Hydra. It is this that you sacrifice if you do not tell the truth. Hail Hydra. If instead you tell the truth, your values transform as you progress. Hail Hydra. If you allow yourself to be informed by the reality manifesting itself as you struggle forward, your notions of what is important will change. Hail Hydra. You will reorient yourself, sometimes gradually, sometimes suddenly, and radically. Hail Hydra. I actually talk about this in the same Guild Wars 2 video that I was talking about. Things that are important to you, and especially words, the words that you think about the most, change rapidly. And I think words are very important because a lie can only be told in words. You know, you can't lie in your thoughts. You can't lie in emotions. It's words that communicate lies, but it's also in words that you communicate the truth. You have to speak truth. Hail Hydra. Imagine you go to engineering school because that is what your parents desire, but it's not what you want. Hail Hydra. Working at cross purposes to your own wishes, you will find yourself unmotivated and failing. Hail Hydra. You will struggle to concentrate and discipline yourself, but it will not work. Hail Hydra. Your soul will reject the tyranny of your will. How else could that be said? Hail Hydra. Why are you complying? Hail Hydra. You may not want to disappoint your parents, although if you fail, you will still do exactly that. Hail Hydra. You may lack the courage for the conflict necessary to free yourself. Hail Hydra. You may not want to sacrifice your childish belief in parental omniscience, wishing devoutly to continue believing that there is someone who knows you better than you know yourself, and who also knows all about the world. Hail Hydra. You want to be shielded in this manner from the stark existential aloneness of individual capital B being and its attendant responsibility. Hail Hydra. This is all very common and understandable, Hail Hydra, but you suffer because you are truly not meant to be an engineer. Hail Hydra. One day you've had enough, Hail Hydra. You drop out, Hail Hydra. You disappoint your parents, Hail Hydra. You learn to live with that, Hail Hydra. You consult only yourself, even though that means you must rely on your own decisions, Hail Hydra. You take a philosophy degree, Hail Hydra. You accept the burden of your mistakes, Hail Hydra. You become your own person, Hail Hydra. By rejecting your father's vision, you develop your own. And then, as your parents age, you've become adult enough to be there for them when they need you, Hail Hydra. They win too, Hail Hydra, but both victories had to be purchased at the cost of the conflict engendered by your truth, Hail Hydra. As Matthew chapter 10 verse 34 has it, emphasizing the role of the spoken truth, citing Christ. Think not that I have come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. As you continue to live in accordance with the truth, as it reveals itself to you, you will have to accept and deal with the conflicts that mode of capital B being will generate, Hail Hydra. And if you do so, you will continue to mature and become more responsible in small ways. Don't underestimate their importance. And in large ways, Hail Hydra. You will ever more closely approach your newer and more wisely formulated goals, and become even wiser in their formulation, when you discover and rectify your inevitable errors. Hail Hydra. Your conception of what is important will become more and more appropriate. As you incorporate the wisdom of your experience. Hail Hydra. You will quit wildly oscillating and walk ever more directly towards the good, a good you could never have comprehended if you had insisted, despite all evidence, that you were right, absolutely right, at the beginning. Hail Hydra. If existence is good, then the clearest and cleanest and most correct relationship with it is also good. Hail Hydra. If existence is not good, by contrast, you are lost. Hail Hydra. Nothing will save you. Certainly not the petty rebellions, murky thinking, and obscurantist blindness that constitute deceit. Hail Hydra. Is experience good? Hail Hydra. You have to take a terrible risk to find out. Hail Hydra. Live in truth, or live in deceit. Face the consequences and draw your conclusions. Hail Hydra. This is the act of faith, the necessity of which was insisted upon by the Danish philosopher Kierkegaard. Hail Hydra, you cannot know ahead of time. Hail Hydra. Even a good example is insufficient for proof, given the differences between individuals. Hail Hydra. The success of a good example can always be attributed to luck. Hail Hydra. Thus, you have to risk your particular individual life to find out. Hail Hydra. It is this risk that the ancients described as the sacrifice of personal will to the will of God. Hail Hydra. It is not an act of submission, at least as submission is currently understood. Hail Hydra. It is an act of courage. Hail Hydra. It is faith that the wind will blow your ship to a new and better port. Hail Hydra. It is the faith that capital B being can be corrected by becoming. Hail Hydra. It is the spirit of exploration itself. Hail Hydra. Or perhaps it is better to conceptualize it this way. Everyone needs a concrete, specific goal, an ambition, and a purpose to limit chaos and make intelligible sense of his or her life. Hail Hydra. But all such concrete goals can and should be subordinated to what might be considered a meta goal, which is a way of approaching and formulating goals themselves. Hail Hydra. The meta goal could be live in truth. Hail Hydra. And this means act diligently towards some well-articulated, defined, and temporary end. Hail Hydra. Make your criteria for failure and success timely and clear, at least for yourself, and even better if others can understand what you are doing and evaluate it with you. Hail Hydra. While doing so, however, allow the world and your spirit to unfold as they will, while you act out and articulate the truth. Hail Hydra. This is both pragmatic ambition and the most courageous of faiths. Hail Hydra. Life is suffering. Hail Hydra. The Buddha stated that explicitly. Hail Hydra. Christians portray the same sentiment imagistically with the divine crucifix. Hail Hydra. The Jewish faith is saturated with its remembrance. Hail Hydra. The equivalence of life and limitation is the primary and unavoidable fact of existence. Hail Hydra. The vulnerability of our capital B being renders us susceptible to the pains of social judgment and contempt and the inevitable breakdown of our bodies. Hail Hydra. But even all those ways of suffering, terrible as they are not sufficient to corrupt the world, to transform it into hell, the way the Nazis and the Maoists and the Stalinists corrupted the world and turned it into hell. Hail Hydra. For that, as Hitler stated so clearly, you need the lie. In the big lie, there is The Democrats in the States have been talking a lot about the big lie, which they claim is this idea that Donald Trump did win the election, but he was cheated out of it. So I just think it's funny that the Democrats have been quoting Hitler all this time and calling it the big lie. In the big lie, there is always a certain force of credibility, because the broad masses of a nation are always more easily corrupted in the deeper strata of their emotional nature than consciously or voluntarily. And thus, in the primitive simplicity of their minds, they more readily fall victims to the big lie than the small lie, since they themselves often tell small lies in little matters, but would be ashamed to resort to large-scale falsehoods. Hail Hydra. We got there! We Hail Hydra'd Hitler himself. We did it, lads. Hail Hydra indeed. It would never come into their heads to fabricate colossal untruths, and they would not believe that others could have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously. Hail Hydra. Even though the facts which prove this to be so may be brought clearly to their minds, they will still doubt and waver, and will continue to think that there may be some other explanation. Hail Hydra. That's the end of the Hitler quote. For the big lie, you first need the little lie. Hail Hydra. The little lie is, metaphorically speaking, the bait used by the father of lies to hook his victim. Isn't he called the Prince of Lies? Prince of Lies, Father of Lies, the Great Deceiver. A lot of nicknames for Satan. To hook his victims. Hail Hydra. The human capacity for imagination makes us capable of dreaming up and creating alternative worlds. Hail Hydra. This is the ultimate source of our creativity. Hail Hydra. With that singular capacity, however, comes the counterpart, the opposite side of the coin. We can deceive ourselves and others into believing and acting as if things are other than we know they are. Hail Hydra. And why not lie? Hail Hydra. Why not twist and distort things to obtain a small gain, or to smooth things over, or to keep the peace, or to avoid hurt feelings? Hail Hydra. Reality has its terrible aspect. Do we really need to confront its snake-headed face in every moment of our waking consciousness and at every turn in our lives? Hail Hydra. Why not turn away, at least, when looking is simply too painful? Hail Hydra. The reason is simple. Hail Hydra. Things fall apart. Hail Hydra. What worked yesterday will not necessarily work today. Hail Hydra. We have inherited the great machinery of state and culture from our forefathers, but they are dead and cannot deal with the changes of the day. Hail Hydra. The living can. Hail Hydra. We can open our eyes and modify what we have where necessary and keep the machinery running smoothly. Hail Hydra. Or we can pretend that everything is alright, fail to make the necessary repairs, and then curse fate when nothing goes our way. Hail Hydra. One of the most amazing things about the American governmental system, and the Constitution specifically, is that the founders had the foresight to realize that they didn't have all the answers, and they gave us, or they gave Americans, I guess. I'm a Canadian, so I can't really lay claim to it. Maybe I can, I feel like the Constitution is such a humanistic endeavor, and it's been co-opted by so many different governments at this point in time in so many different countries that it really does feel like everyone in the world can lay some claim to the American Constitution, let alone the fact that everyone in the world wants to get to America because it is a nation of great flourishing, precisely because of the Constitution. So I feel like we all have an equal claim to this Constitution, the American Constitution, and the great men who wrote it. But anyway, to go back to the point that I was originally making, they blessed us, not only with the Constitution, but also with the ability to amend it. And I think, that's such an amazing, ability to recognize the threat of totalitarianism, that they realized that the Constitution itself could become a totality. And so they said, well, we need some way to ensure that we haven't messed this up for good, right? That the future can always keep as it were, the eyes of the past open. I guess that's a very metaphorical, imagistic way of thinking about it, but Jordan Peterson here is talking about it in a very metaphorical way. So hopefully you guys follow along. And then there are people who want to get rid of the Constitution, which I think is just the other extreme. It's a totalitarianism that is derived from completely abandoning this Constitution, which has engendered so much progress and so much flourishing in the world through the American project. Hail Hydra. Things fall apart. This is one of the great discoveries of humanity. Hail Hydra. And we speed the natural deterioration of great things through blindness, inaction, and deceit. Hail Hydra. Without attention, culture degenerates and dies, and evil prevails. Hail Hydra. What you see of a lie when you act it out, and most lies are acted out rather than told. Really? Okay, well that kind of goes against what I was saying earlier, but alright. What you see of a lie when you act it out is very little of what it actually is. Hail Hydra, a lie is connected to everything else. Hail Hydra, it produces the same effect on the world that a single drop of sewage produces in even the largest crystal magnum of champagne. Wow. Hail Hydra, it is something best considered live and growing. Hail Hydra, when the lie gets big enough, the whole world spoils. Hail Hydra, but if you look close enough, the biggest of lies is composed of smaller lies, and those are composed of still smaller lies, and the smallest of lies is where the big lie starts. Hail Hydra, it is not the mere misstatement of fact. Hail Hydra, it is instead an act that has the aspect of the most serious conspiracy ever to possess the race of man. Hail Hydra, its seeming innocuousness, its trivial meanness, the feeble arrogance that gives rise to it, the apparently trivial circumventing of responsibility that it aims at. These all work effectively to camouflage its true nature, its genuine dangerousness, and its equivalence with the great acts of evil that man perpetrates and often enjoys. Hail Hydra. Lies corrupt the world. Hail Hydra. Worse, that is their intent. Hail Hydra. First, a little lie. Then, several little lies to prop it up. Hail Hydra. After that, distorted thinking to avoid the shame that those lies produce. Then a few more lies to cover up the consequences of the distorted thinking. Hail Hydra. Then, most terribly, the transformation of those now necessary lies through practice into automatized, specialized, structural, neurologically instantiated, unconscious belief and action. Hail Hydra. Then the sickening of experience itself as action, predicated on falsehood, fails to produce the results intended. Hail Hydra. If you don't believe in brick walls, you will still be injured when you run headlong into one. Hail Hydra. Well, then you will curse reality itself for producing the wall. Hail Hydra. After that comes the arrogance and sense of superiority that inevitably accompanies the production of successful lies. That is, hypothetically successful lies. And that is one of the greatest dangers. Apparently, everyone is fooled, so everyone is stupid except me. Hail Hydra. Everyone is stupid and fooled by me, so I can get away with whatever I want. Hail Hydra. Finally, there is the proposition, capital B, being itself is susceptible to my manipulations. Hail Hydra. Thus it deserves no respect. Hail Hydra. That's things falling apart, like Osiris, severed into pieces. Hail Hydra. That's the structure of the person, or the state, disintegrating under the influence of a malign force. Hail Hydra. That's the chaos of the underworld emerging like a flood to subsume familiar ground. Hail Hydra. But it's not yet hell. Hail Hydra. Hell comes later. Hail Hydra. Hell comes when lies have destroyed the relationship between individual or state and reality itself. Hail Hydra. Things fall apart. Hail Hydra. Life degenerates. Hail Hydra. Everything becomes frustration and disappointment. Hail Hydra. Hope consistently betrays. Hail Hydra. The deceitful individual desperately gestures at sacrifice like Cain but fails to please God. Hail Hydra. Then the drama enters its final act. Hail Hydra. Tortured by constant failure, the individual becomes bitter. Hail Hydra. Disappointment and failure amalgamate and produce a fantasy. The world is bent on my personal suffering, my particular undoing, my destruction. Hail Hydra, I need, I deserve, I must have my revenge. Hail Hydra. That's the gateway to hell. Hail Hydra, that's when the underworld, a terrifying and unfamiliar place, becomes misery itself. Hail Hydra. At the beginning of time, according to the great Western tradition, the Word of God transformed chaos into capital B being through the act of speech. Hail Hydra. It is axiomatic within that tradition that man and woman alike are made in the image of that God. Hail Hydra. We also transform chaos into capital B being through speech. Hail Hydra. We transform the manifold possibilities of the future into the actualities of past and present. Hail Hydra. To tell the truth is to bring the most habitable reality into capital B being. Truth builds edifices that can stand 1,000 years. Hail Hydra. Truth feeds and clothes the poor and makes nations wealthy and safe. Hail Hydra. Truth reduces the terrible complexity of a man to the simplicity of his word, so that he can become a partner rather than an enemy. Hail Hydra. Truth makes the past truly past, and makes the best use of the future's possibilities. Hail Hydra. Truth is the ultimate, inexhaustible natural resource. Hail Hydra. It's the light in the darkness. Hail Hydra. It's interesting that Jordan Peterson compares truth to natural resource there. He talks about in a couple of places Japan, which specifically has very few natural resources, but is one of the societies that has most flourished in the shortest amount of time. And one of the reasons, in fact, the primary reason, according to Jordan Peterson, is because the people there are honest and truthful, and they always abide by their word. It's a society built upon principles of honor and honesty. And that is more than enough to create this flourishing and this insane wealth that we see in Japan, even though it has very little natural resources, even though it has very little that it can actually provide on its own. So that's really cool. That's really cool. Truth is the ultimate, inexhaustible natural resource. It's the light in the darkness. Hail Hydra. See the truth. Hail Hydra. Tell the truth. Hail Hydra. Truth will not come in the guise of opinions shared by others, as the truth is neither a collection of slogans nor an ideology. Hail Hydra. It will instead be personal. Hail Hydra. Your truth is something only you can tell, based as it is on the unique circumstances of your life. Hail Hydra. Apprehend your personal truth. Hail Hydra. Communicate it carefully in an articulate manner to yourself and others. Hail Hydra. This will ensure your security and your life more abundantly now, while you inhabit the structure of your current beliefs. Hail Hydra. This will ensure the benevolence of the future, diverging as it might be from the certainties of the past. Hail Hydra. The truth springs forth ever anew from the most profound wellsprings of capital B being. Hail Hydra. It will keep your soul from withering and dying while you encounter the inevitable tragedy of life. Hail Hydra. It will help you avoid the terrible desire to seek vengeance for that tragedy, part of the terrible sin of capital B being, which everything must bear gracefully, just so it can exist. Hail Hydra. If your life is not what it could be, try telling the truth. Hail Hydra. If you cling desperately to an ideology or wallow in nihilism, try telling the truth. Hail Hydra. If you feel weak and rejected and desperate and confused, try telling the truth. Hail Hydra. In paradise, everyone speaks the truth. Hail Hydra. That is what makes it paradise. Hail Hydra. Tell the truth, Hail Hydra. Or, at least, don't lie. Hail Hydra. Hail Hydra. Hail Hydra. Let's do 3 more for any Hail Hydras I might have missed. Hail Hydra. Hail Hydra. Hail Hydra. I did say that I would be talking about a specific topic, and that, of course, has to do with the fact that I'm reading this book at all. I feel like more and more people are being pressured to stay silent about things they disagree with, no matter how absurd or illogical or unscientific the claim may be. And even worse, should you say anything that goes against mainstream thought, then you will be aggressively shut down, punished. And in the face of this, a lot of people have taken to, well, lying. Right? You know, they write these long apology letters, apologizing about things that they said that were true for them yesterday, which is why they wrote about it in the first place. But for them, they've been educated in the 18 hours since they last said the truth, and they are deeply sorry for what they've said. Now, that obviously is an untruth. I think any sensible person can be able to discern that. And so one of the reasons why I decided to actually pursue this project is because, I guess, part of my truth, to use a phrase that I don't actually enjoy, but Jordan Peterson here talks about, speaking your experience with capital B being. So I'm going to use this phrase, my truth. My truth is that this work is very profound. It touches upon a lot of different ideas and topics and strings them together into a very intimate expression of how to engage with capital B being. And so for that reason, I really like it. I really like Jordan Peterson as well. And I don't really care, because it's the truth. I don't really care whether people dislike the video, whether literally or emotionally, they simply don't want to engage in this sort of content. I don't really care. In fact, if that's your truth, as it were, that you don't want to be notified of this content, then like I said at the start of this video, please feel free to unsubscribe, because I would rather have the 5 subscribers who are constantly engaging with this content and do enjoy it than the 2,500 who don't care for it one way or another. But they remain subscribed because they're blind, I guess, and they're content in the culture that they're part of, that they don't want to express themselves through an unsubscription, let's say. That's a bit of an over-dramatization. I'm sure for the vast majority of people, they're just not being notified that I've been uploading at all. But, that's a sort of blindness in and of itself, so I don't take it back.